If you're moving to Sydney, Australia, but you're having trouble deciding where to live in such a huge city, I've been house sitting in Sydney since 2016 and I've put together this guide to help you choose where to live in Sydney. Hi, I'm Lisa from Australian travel and migration blog dreamingofdownunder.com. I'll leave a link below to my blog post to go with this video, and I've also got lots and lots of guides on there on fun things to do in Sydney as well as in New South Wales, lots of travel guides and general guides on where to live in Australia and moving to Australia. So make sure you check out my blog for more information. I moved to Australia in 2015 and Sydney was always my end destination. I've been here a few times before and always really loved it, and I don't regret moving here. So if you've made the decision to move to Sydney, or if you're already here and you just want to learn a bit more about the other areas, I'm going to run through the different regions of Sydney for you. So I've house sat in quite a lot of different areas. Sydney is absolutely huge. I think there's something like 600 and something suburbs, so obviously I haven't been everywhere. The places I've spent the most time are the northern beaches, which is where I've lived for the last 4 years, so I know that really well, and quite a lot of time in the inner west as well. I will cover the other areas, but I'm not as much of an expert on those. So if any local people are watching and you want to chip in with extra information, that would be really helpful for people watching. Before I go through the regions, I'll go through some general information about Sydney. So first of all, it's very diverse, both culturally and in terms of landscape. So people tend to think of Sydney as just a massive city and skyscrapers and apartment buildings and all that, and it really isn't. It's so different across the city. Around the city and some other areas, you do have some really high density areas and high-rise buildings, but you've also got lots and lots of coastline. You've got lots and lots of waterways, rivers, bays. You've got the Blue Mountains inland. You've got quite a lot of national parks. Sydney is a very green city. You've just got all sorts of areas, your typical suburbia or like more low density areas with big houses. So I'll try and run through what each region is like according to what I've seen. This is just based on my experience, so here goes. Before I touch on the regions, I will go through a few factors that you should think about before deciding where to live. So first of all, if you're not going to be working in the city centre, you might not really need to go there as much as you think. I'm from just outside Birmingham in the UK, and it's very different to somewhere like London, for example. If you go out shopping or a night out, you will generally go into the city centre or your town centre. You don't tend to go to like little suburbs, whereas in Sydney it's really different. They have indoor shopping malls absolutely everywhere, and also like the small suburbs have strips of cafes and restaurants which tend to be really nice. So if you do want to go out, you don't really need to go into the city. So just factor that in. You might not really need to be close to the city unless you have to get there every day for work. Second is the price of property and rent. So this does vary across the city. As a general rule of thumb, the further inland you go, so the further west, the cheaper it tends to get. A few of my friends have bought houses now and they went an hour inland so they could afford bigger family homes. So the city is quite expensive, and generally the beach areas tend to be. But also there are pockets of kind of varying priced properties, so I would look into that before you choose somewhere if that's an important factor for you. Public transport, if you'll need to get that. So I really only get public transport if I go into the city, just because I can't be bothered to drive there and park. It's easy just to get the bus or train. Sydney has ferries and trains and light rail, which is like a tram thing, and buses. So it is really well serviced in terms of public transport. A lot of my friends don't have cars and don't need them. I've always had one. I need it for house sitting, and I do find it really useful. But you can get around by public transport. I will say though that it can be slow, particularly if you're going by bus and it's rush hour or something. I'll leave a link below to a website where you can plan your trip. You can do this on Google Maps as well, but you can go on the New South Wales transport website and they'll do a trip planner. So say you needed to go to the city for work, don't think that being geographically close to the city means that you're going to get there the fastest. You could live somewhere where you have to get maybe 2 buses and it could take ages. You could live somewhere far away and you can get straight on a train and it might even be quicker. So I wouldn't just look at a map and look at the distances. So the train line goes from the city. You can go north, you can go inland, you can go south In terms of the eastern suburbs, which has lots of beaches like Bondi, you can get the train as far as Bondi Junction, and then you've got to get a bus down. And also the northern beaches, you can't get a train up there, you'd have to get the bus. So they're a little bit slower to get into the city from some of those places. Some other things to think of, which I guess you think of anywhere in a city really, traffic noise, so being close to a main road or train station might be really useful, but it also might be noisy, so I'd think about that. Also look at where the airport is, so it's kind of directly south from the city. The inner west generally gets the most aircraft noise because it's below the flight path. I've been in some houses where literally the furniture shook because of a plane coming over. So yeah, I'd look into that. Traffic congestion, it can be really bad in some areas. When I used to house sit around the inner west, it was pretty much heaving. I did house sit for someone who'd left the eastern suburbs in Coogee Beach to live in the inner west, and they said it was so much quieter than the eastern suburbs. Now I'm up in the northern beaches though. The traffic is really, really low compared to down in the inner west, so it's quite nice up here. Another thing to think about is parking. So generally the city centre, like the inner city area, and maybe if you're very, very close to a popular beach like Bondi or somewhere, you might have metered parking. So if you live there, you might need to pay for a parking permit so you can park on the street. But generally the residential areas outside of that kind of inner city area tends to have completely unrestricted free parking, so I wouldn't really worry about that if you're out in the residential suburbs. I've never ever had to pay for parking on a house sit. And most of the kind of newer high-rise buildings near the city tend to have car parks for the residents. To give you a rough guide of how the city's laid out, you've got a river cutting across horizontally, and that's where you've got Sydney Harbour. So generally if people say north of the bridge or south of the bridge, they mean the Harbour Bridge, and they mean north or south of the Parramatta River. So very, very broadly, the north is quite leafy. Not all of it, you've got some high-rise areas kind of closer to the city, but it is a bit lower density and a little bit greener, and you've got quite a lot of natural bushland and hikes and things. Whereas south of the river, particularly kind of the inner west area, I found is more residential, and you've got lots of nice parks and things, but it's not so much kind of natural older bushland. But it does vary, and you do still have pockets of nice little natural areas. The eastern suburbs, for example, you've got loads of lovely coastal walks and things like that. The airport, as I said, is south of the city, so if you're somebody who needs to fly a lot for work, you might want to think about being further down that southern end, so maybe the eastern suburbs, which are kind of southeast of the city, or inner west, or down around Botany Bay down there. If you want to head off on lots of weekends away by car, you might want to be near the main roads that leave either from the northern suburbs going north or from the south heading south down the coast. That might make things easier for you. Okay, so region 1, I'm going to start with the inner city area. So you've got the city centre, and Australians call that the CBD, which is the Central Business District. So in Sydney, you've got lots of like really long vertical roads, Pitt Street, George Street, and a few others. And then at the north of there, you've got the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. So if you want to be really, really, really close to those places, then the CBD would be a good option. You would only really have a choice of high-rise buildings if you want to be right in the city like that. You've also got Pyrmont just to the west, where you could easily walk to the city. You've got Ultimo, I think just south of there, Darling Harbour, and then just to the east of the city, you've got some nice suburbs, Elizabeth Bay and Potts Point. They're quite kind of young professional areas. You can get to the nightlife in King's Cross, if that's still a big thing. It's a long time since I've been there. And lots of nice cafes and things as well. And you can get to the water, so it's quite pretty around there. And then just south of the city, you've got Surry Hills, which is another area that's popular with young professionals. You've got a nice street with lots of cool cafes and restaurants and some nightlife there, so that's quite a nice area. And you've got quite a lot of the older terraced houses. They're quite common around the city centre. You don't get them so much when you travel further away from the city, but they've got quite a lot of character. Also Paddington and Darlinghurst are quite nice suburbs, really close to the city. Some nice shops and things there. Oxford Street that runs through Darlinghurst is a really big busy street, and that's where the Mardi Gras parade is held each year, so that's got a lot of gay bars and that kind of thing. I would say the inner city areas are a bit more popular with young people. The second region I'll cover is the eastern suburbs, so If you've got the city and then you've got the river coming off towards the ocean, so really the area southeast of there is the eastern suburbs. That's where Bondi is. I'm sure you've heard of that. So you've got lots and lots of beaches down there. You've got Bondi Beach, Coogee Beach, and a whole string of beaches down to where Botany Bay starts. You've also got beachside suburbs that are along the harbour rather than the ocean, so places like Rose Bay, that's really nice. That's a really good family area. And you've got some really posh suburbs as well, like Point Piper and Vaucluse. They're both on the harbour, and lots of mansions there. Watson's Bay is right at the tip where you've got the ocean, and then you've got the mouth of the Parramatta River. So that's quite a small suburb, but it's really nice for a day trip. It's got a really nice seaside vibe. And some of those harbour side suburbs have really nice views of the city skyline as well. So Watson's Bay does, and Rose Bay does as well. So you get some really good views, particularly at sunset. Bondi and Coogee are two of the bigger, kind of busier suburbs. They're very popular with tourists. They're very popular with British and Irish expats as well, so you can get your proper English fish and chips there. They've both got nightlife as well as restaurants and cafes and a really nice buzzing kind of atmosphere. So if you want to be somewhere busy and fun, then Bondi or Coogee could be for you. And then heading south, you've got Maroubra Beach, which is really huge. It's not such a busy place as Bondi and Coogee. A bit more family friendly, I would say. It's a lovely beach. And then south of there you've got Malabar and a few others. You've got Little Bay, so I would say it gets a little bit quieter as you head south. In Sydney there's a really busy breakfast cafe scene, so it gets really busy in the mornings. If you head anywhere early morning, cafes will be open, there'll be people swimming, there'll be people doing exercise boot camps on the beach, so there's a lot going on in the mornings. If you do want to live in the eastern suburbs beach areas, just take a look at public transport if you'll need to get that, because it can be a little bit slow getting into the city even though it looks quite close on the map. The eastern suburbs is known as being quite expensive and a little bit fancy. I would say the demographic, particularly Bondi and Coogee, is a little bit younger than up in the northern beaches, but it's definitely got some really swanky, posh suburbs. If you want to live by the beach, but the eastern suburbs or the northern beaches are a bit out of your price range, there is another area that I think gets a little bit overlooked. So if you go down the coast, down the eastern suburbs from Bondi, and then you've got Botany Bay, a big bay that comes in, and then you've got beaches all along the edge of there. You do have the airport on one edge of it. But you've got quite nice beaches, nice white sand. I think the downside would be, I guess, the airport, and on the other side of the bay you've got Port Botany, so there's a bit of a kind of industrial view, but it's still a really nice beach area, nice white sand. You've got really calm water as well because it's on the bay. The busiest area I think is Brighton Les Sands. That's got a netted off swimming area, and it's got a cafe right by the beach, and a little area with restaurants and cafes. You've got quite a lot of Mediterranean restaurants there. There's a walking track along the beach as well, so you can do a nice long walk or run or cycle along there. And then just slightly inland from those beach suburbs, you've got places like Hurstville and Kogarah that are quite busy and have shops and things. And the plus point about there is that it's on the train line, so it doesn't go right to the beach, but it does go kind of just north of the beaches on Botany Bay. So I think somewhere like Hurstville or Carlton from the city is only about 20 minutes on the train. I would say those areas are not quite as trendy or posh as the eastern suburbs, but they're still pretty nice and a bit more affordable. The next area is the Sutherland Shire. So if you're in that Botany Bay area, here's the bay. On the southern side of that bay, you've got more suburbs there. So the main one people will have heard of is Cronulla. So that's it's a little peninsula, and it's got quite a nice little area with shops and cafes and restaurants and things. It's got really lovely long beach. You can do a gorgeous walk around the peninsula there. From the city it is quite far. I think it's about an hour on the train to the city, but it is a very pretty area down there. And you've also got some bigger suburbs like Miranda, which has a big shopping centre. And you can head to Canal, which is on the end of like a little peninsula, and you can do some coastal walks there. It's a funny little suburb, it's tiny, but you've got Kamei Botany Bay National Park, and you can do some really nice cliffside walks there. So along the ocean side, it's not beaches, it's just these big cliffs, but you can do some really nice hikes down there. And from that area down there, you can get to the Royal National Park, which is just south, so that's really pretty. Lots of nice hiking. You can go camping there. There's a little village there called Bundina as well, which is great. You can go there on a little ferry from Cronulla. I went to Cronulla, I don't know, 6 months ago or something, And after living in the northern beaches for a few years, I could really see the difference just in the people. It was much more like people were very dressed up. It was, I think, a Saturday kind of early evening when I was out there. So where I live in the northern beaches is quite sort of casual and surfy, I suppose, and down there seemed a little bit more glam, like everyone was going out in their nice dresses and stuff. So a little bit of a different vibe. Okay, the next region I will cover is the inner west. So if you zoom back up to the city again and then you draw a line south, to the east of there is the eastern suburbs, and to the west of there, so west of the city but south of the Parramatta River, is the inner west area. It's a huge region. It's really varied across it. A lot of people tend to go to some of the popular suburbs for bars and things and then think that the whole inner west is like that, and it's not. It's really varied. It's known for being quite an artistic area. It's got the kind of cool, more hipster suburbs. So I would say it's mostly kind of typical suburbia. It's got nice parks and things and tree-lined roads, but it doesn't have like the natural bushland, or I've never seen any anyway, so you wouldn't go like for a proper bush hike there or anything. So starting from closer to the city, you've got places like Newtown, lots of bars, lots of cafes, restaurants, nightlife, big live music scene. It's a little bit more kind of alternative, a bit hipster, I suppose. Definitely popular with younger people, and it's pretty busy. But actually when you get off that main road, it is quite quiet. I've done some house sits there. It's got a lot of the old Victorian terraced houses, so lots of those really, really narrow houses. The parking there is horrible. It's really, really narrow roads, and because you've got so many narrow houses together, you've got a lot of cars to put in a small space. You'll need a parking permit probably if you live there. It's nearly all time restricted parking. So really nice, cool old houses, very artistic vibe. Yeah, the parking might drive you mad. There's a train station. It takes, I think it's only like less than 10 minutes to the city from Newtown. So definitely very urban, but also you've got the big Sydney Park close by, so that's really huge. So the Newtown area used to be like the young, hip, trendy area, and now apparently, according to people younger than me who've told me, Marrickville is the new in place to go. So that's, I think, a little bit further west, a bit further away from the city. But that's also got a nice big street with all the bars and restaurants and cafes and things on. A lot of the inner west has older housing, so you've got some suburbs where it's all the big old Federation homes. They're really nice. And some areas have the little terraces as well. Just west of the city, you've got Glebe. I think that's a really nice suburb. It's close to a university, so it's quite studenty, but it's just got a lot of character. The street with all the cafes and things, I guess, is similar to Newtown in that it's a little bit arty and different, but it feels a little bit more quaint and leafy, I would say, and a little bit quieter. I think it's a really nice area. And then just north of Glebe, you've got a finger of land coming off that's close to the city, but you've also got the river on the north side of it, is Balmain. So you've got Balmain, Rozelle, Lilyfield. That's got the older houses as well, but it's got quite a lot of atmosphere. Balmain has lots and lots of really nice old pubs, and it's quite well known for that. It's also got a really nice long strip of cafes, restaurants, shops, all of that as well. So if you want to look on a map, look for Darling Street. So from the city you go up Victoria Road, and then you've got Darling Street, and that's got all those nice cafes and things on. Also you do have ferry wharves, so at Balmain East at the very tip you can just get the ferry across to the city. And also from where you've got Rozelle and Lilyfield, there's a little inlet that comes in off the river, and you've got a walking track that's about 7 kilometres, I think. It's called the Bay Run, so that's really nice, quite picturesque around the waterside. Leichhardt is a nice suburb, that's next to Lilyfield. You've got some waterside area there too. You've also got a really big leisure centre and outdoor swimming pool, that's really nice. And you've got Norton Street, which has like cafes and restaurants, and it has a lot of Italian residents, so quite a big influence there in the restaurants and things. So the rest of the inner west, it's quite different. So along the river's edge you've got some quite pretty suburbs, I would say. So places like Abbotsford and Russell Lee, you've got some nice waterside areas. Concord, so that surprised me. It's just a little residential suburb, but it's got quite a nice street with all restaurants and things and outdoor seating. If you want to access the city by public transport, I would look at where the train line goes, because you've got a train line heading west from the city. So places like Lewisham, Petersham, Ashfield, so they're kind of the inland suburbs, they're not on the water. They're quite nice, quite wide roads as you get out there, and bigger family homes. It's not like Newtown where you've got all those really tiny little narrow roads. Actually, if you want to look at how high density places in terms of the roads. Just look on Google Maps, like if you go onto Newtown, you'll just see all these little tiny perpendicular roads, and then if you go out to somewhere like Ashfield, they'll be a little bit bigger. I'm not too familiar with any further west than that. There are obviously like lots more suburbs, but those are the ones that I've been to. Then if you head out much further west, you've got Greater Western Sydney and the Blue Mountains area. So I'm not as familiar with this, apart from the Blue Mountains. That's a nice place for a day trip, but it is 2 hours from the city. So it's quite far out. But you have got Parramatta out in the far western area. Some of my friends have moved out kind of close to there because it's cheaper. So that's almost like another city. It's just a suburb, but it's got quite a big CBD. It's got the high buildings and everything. So it's quite popular out there. You can also do a nice ferry ride into the city from Parramatta, but it's still, I think, about an hour from the city by bus or ferry. And Parramatta has quite a lot of nice older heritage buildings. Okay, next I'm going to focus on the areas that are north of the Parramatta River, so north of the bridge as it's called. So just north of the city, across the harbour. So if you go north on the Harbour Bridge, you'll come to the lower North Shore. There's a little suburb called North Sydney. North Sydney doesn't mean like anywhere in the north of Sydney, it's a specific suburb. So it's kind of like an extension of the city, lots of big office buildings and things. You've got some really nice suburbs on the water's edge around the lower North Shore. It's a bit greener than the south. It's got quite leafy streets. If you read any kind of real estate stuff, it'll say the leafy North Shore. It's very pleasant and it's quiet. I've got a friend who used to live in Lavender Bay, and that's near Luna Park. So I used to stay with her sometimes, and it's surprisingly quiet actually. It's quite difficult to park, but it is quiet on the streets. You've got some really lovely older cute buildings as well, so you've got little old apartment blocks and houses, so lots and lots of character up there. And it's really close to the city, so you can just hop on a train from North Sydney or some of the northern suburbs and get down to the city really easily, or just walk or cycle across the Harbour Bridge. So close to the city, you've got Lavender Bay, you've got North Sydney, you've got Kirribilli, Milson's Point. I did a really nice house sit once at a suburb called McMahon's Point, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So that's just a little bit west of the city, but just on the riverside still. So it was really quiet and really pretty. Greenwich is really pretty as well. I did an art trail there once, I think, where you can go into people's homes. Really lovely views from there. It's surprisingly green. You just suddenly get these viewpoints and you can look across the city and you've just got all this kind of greenery in front. It's absolutely lovely. In terms of the busier, more built up areas, you've got St Leonard's and Crow's Nest, so you've got quite a lot of apartment blocks there and lots of restaurants and that kind of thing. And then you've got Chatswood if you go a little bit further north as well, and that's on the train line, and that's got a lot of high-rise buildings. If you want somewhere a little bit greener, Waverton, Wollstonecraft, Lane Cove, they're all heading a little bit more northwest along the river, but they're really nice, pretty green places. You've got a national park in Lane Cove as well, so you can do a few walks. And along the northern side of the river, you've got some really nice bushland areas, so Berry Island Reserve, for example. And then just to the eastern side of the lower North Shore, you've got Mossman and Cremorne Point. Really lovely waterside areas. Mossman's quite a big area. It's got a main road going through it, Military Road. That's got lots of shops and restaurants and things on. It's got lots of mansions. I think there are apartments too here and there, but it's quite a fancy area. I used to do a house sit there in a really fancy mansion. But lots of waterways, really nice parks on the waterways. You can walk your dog around there. Really pretty. Mossman is where Balmoral Beach is, which I think is one of my favourite beaches. I haven't been there for years. It's got nice calm water because it's not on the ocean, it's on the harbour side. But really nice white sand, really pretty. And you've got Chinaman's Beach there as well, which is a little bit less known, but still really nice. And the next region I'll go through is the Northern Beaches. So that's where I live now. That's my favourite region of Sydney. So if you've got the city and the river, you've got the lower North Shore. And then if you head northeast, you go up a peninsula, and that's the Northern Beaches. It doesn't have a train line, but you can get buses up and down there. The ferry goes as far as Manly, which is right at the bottom. So it basically runs from Manly, which is a really popular beach for day trips, up to Palm Beach at the top of the peninsula. That's where Home and Away is filmed. It would take probably an hour to drive from the top to the bottom. It's a lot lower density than places like the Inner West. It doesn't have any kind of through traffic because you can't get anywhere. It's a peninsula. So once you get past like the busy areas like Manly and DY, it does get quite quiet, and I don't think I've ever sat in a traffic jam apart from going up to Palm Beach on a public holiday, so I wouldn't recommend that. It's really lovely. It's very different from the eastern suburbs. The sand, once you get north of Manly, is like a dark orange colour rather than the white. It's got really big craggy headlands, and then it's got the ocean on one side, and on the western side you've got pit water, so you've got an inlet of water that comes down. The views are lovely, so if you go to that western side and look across, you've got Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park. So you're just looking out across water at greenery, really, really pretty, really nice still water. You can do lots of hikes. You can pretty much hike like from the north to the south, mostly along coastal tracks. It's generally green, it's very hilly. If you go inland from the coast, even just about 10 minutes, it starts to get a little bit more rural. So places like Ingleside and even the inland side of Warriewood, it's a lot more kind of rural. You get little farms, you'll start passing fields and things, so it's amazing how different it is from the city, even though it's not that far away. So I would say if you need to get to the city for work or anything, then look into your public transport options. There's a bus called the B-Line bus which goes as far north as Mona Vale down to the city, and that's got limited stops, so that's usually your fastest option. From DY it takes about half an hour to get to the city, or about 45 minutes from Mona Vale. So your biggest, busiest areas, I would say you got Manly. Manly's really popular with tourists, so it's pretty hard to park there, I've found. And then DY. DY is quite high density, and it's definitely got the cheapest housing, I think, because I've looked at houses a lot, and it's got a lot of the cheaper apartments and some of the inland areas around there, like Brookvale, which is quite industrial. But if you're trying to get on the bottom of the housing ladder, those are quite good areas. In general, you've got a lot of big houses further north, and it gets kind of lower density, but you do also have lots of apartment blocks as well. The peninsula kind of changes when you get to, I would say, around Newport. So you go round a really curvy road that goes around the coastline called the Bilgola Bends, and then really from there upwards it just becomes a lot more like a forest. I mean, it's built on it, it's residential, but it's more like a forest that has houses in rather than like a housing area with some trees. So I guess it gets more forested as you head north. It's really lovely up the very north area. Avalon Beach is great. That's got a really, really nice shopping and cafe area and a good beach. Mona Vale has a pretty good shopping area as well. If you need to get to the city and don't want to go too far, Mona Vale's probably the most north you might want to go, I think. And then further down you've got Narrabeen, which is a nice area. It's got lots and lots of apartments, and it feels like quite a holiday area. You've got a lagoon that comes in off there, so you can be kind of sandwiched on a narrow strip of land between the lagoon and the beach, so it's got lots of nature there. And then just heading inland around the Pittwater area, you've got Bayview as well and Church Point, so they're really pretty areas on the water side. Very, very green there. It can be quite a long drive to get to places. You've got lots of very long but dead-end roads. There's not many shortcuts, so sometimes I go and visit people's pets because I'm a pet sitter and it doesn't look very far, but then I have to do this massive route around there. And from Mona Vale also you've got Mona Vale Road heading inland, so that's like a main road that goes inland, so that's another shortcut if you need to head to the city or if you want to head north up the coast. And then the next region is the upper North Shore, so where you had the lower North Shore just north of the city and the river, and then you've got the northern beaches to the east. If you just go north from the lower North Shore, you've got upper North Shore. I haven't spent too much time out there, but it definitely gets very green. I've got friends that live out there and say it's quite popular with like boomers and retired people, so low density, bigger houses, very nice and quiet up there. And you've also got some national parks up there, and you can go hiking. So from Hornsby you can do a lot of hikes, and that's on the train line as well. Places like St Ives you can do hikes from. You've got Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park, so you can do lots of hikes from there. And there are even little suburbs like in the national parks. I did one house sit at a place called Cottage Point, and it's literally on the water side. I mean, it's quite a long drive to anywhere, but it's small, but it's just so pretty, all these big waterside houses. Okay, so that is a broad overview of the different regions of Sydney, so I hope that's given you a better idea. I remember when I was moving here, and just looking at maps and thinking, where on earth am I going to end up? I have no idea. And then I ended up house sitting, so I got to explore everywhere, which has been really, really cool. So if you're not sure if you're going to move to Sydney yet and you're still considering other cities, I've got lots of videos comparing different cities in Australia, so make sure you check those out. And just be aware that Sydney has very expensive housing, the most expensive I think in the country, so definitely factor that in if you're still trying to make a decision. Let me know in the comments if you live here and you've got some favourite suburbs or areas, or you want to add some more information. Sydney is a really amazing place to live, just in terms of all the scenery here and all the diverse landscapes you can visit. You can get the train north up the coast, down the coast, inland to the Blue Mountains. You've got lots and lots of options for day trips, and New South Wales, the state, has got lots and lots of beautiful places too. You could also consider Newcastle to the north, which is another big city in New South Wales, or Wollongong to the south, a slightly smaller city. And you've also got the Central Coast region just north of Sydney as well. You can get a ferry there from Palm Beach on the northern beaches, and they'll be a little bit cheaper for housing than Sydney is. So please give this video a like and subscribe if you're interested in more videos on life and travel in Australia. Thank you for watching.